Greetings in the name of Jesus Christ. My name is Miriam, and I'll be reading to you tonight from the book of Nicodemus, chapter 1. Annas and Caiaphas and Summas and Datum, Gamaliel, Judas, Levi, Nephthalim, Alexander, Cyrus, and other Jews went to Pilate about Jesus, accusing him with many bad crimes, and said, "We are assured that Jesus is the son of Joseph the carpenter, and born of Mary, and that he declares himself the Son of God and a king, and not only so, but attempts the dissolution of the Sabbath and the laws of our fathers." And Pilate replied, "What is it which he declares, and what is it which he attempts dissolving?" And the Jews told him, "We have a law which forbids doing cures on the Sabbath day. But he cures both the lame and the deaf, those afflicted with the palsy, the blind, and lepers, and demoniacs, on that day by wicked methods." Pilate replied, "How can he do this by wicked methods?" They answered, "He is a conjurer, and casts out devils by the prince of the devils, and so all things become subject to him." Then said Pilate, "Casting out devils seems not to be the work of an unclean spirit, but to proceed from the power of God. Amein." And the Jews replied to Pilate, "We entreat your highness to summon him to appear before your tribunal, and hear him yourself." Then Pilate called a messenger and said to him, "By what means will Christ be brought hither?" Then went the messenger forth, and knowing Christ, worshipped him. And having spread the cloak which he had in his hand upon the ground, he said, "Lord, walk upon this and go in, for the governor calls thee." And when the Jews perceived what the messenger had done, they exclaimed against him to Pilate and said, "Why did you not give him his summons by a beetle, and not by a messenger?" For the messenger, when he saw him, worshipped him, and spread the cloak which he had in his hand upon the ground before him, and said to him, "Lord, the governor calls thee." Then Pilate called the messenger and said, "Why hast thou done thus?" And the messenger replied, "When thou sentest me from Jerusalem to Alexander, I saw Jesus sitting in a mean figure upon a she-ass, and the children of the Hebrews cried out, 'Hosanna,' holding boughs of trees in their hands. Others spread their garments in the way and said, 'Save us, thou who art in heaven. Blessed is he who cometh in the name of Yahuwah.' And then the Jews cried out against the messenger and said, 'The children of the Hebrews made their acclamations in the Hebrew language, and how couldst thou, who art a Greek, understand the Hebrew?' And the messenger answered them and said, 'I asked one of the Jews and said, What is this which the children do cry out in the Hebrew language? And he explained it to me, saying, They cry out Hosanna, which being interpreted is, O Yahuwah, save me, or O Yahuwah, save.' Pilate then said to them, Why do you yourselves testify to the words spoken by the children, namely by your silence? In what has the messenger done amiss? And they were silent. Then the governor said unto the messenger, Go forth and endeavor by any means to bring him in. But the messenger went forth and did as before, and said, Lord, come in, for the governor calleth thee. And as Jesus was going in by the ensigns who carried the standards, the tops of them bowed down and worshipped Jesus. Whereupon the Jews exclaimed more vehemently against the ensigns. But Pilate said to the Jews, I know it is not pleasing to you that the top of the standards did of themselves bow and worship Jesus. But why do ye exclaim against the ensigns, as if they had bowed and worshipped? And they replied to Pilate, We saw the ensigns themselves bowing and worshipping Jesus. Then the governor called the ensigns and said unto them, Why did you do thus? And the ensigns said to Pilate, We are all pagans and worship the gods in temples. And how should we think anything about worshipping him? We only held the standards in our hands, and they bowed themselves and worshipped him. And then said Pilate to the rulers of the synagogue, Do ye yourselves choose some strong men, and let them hold the standards, and we shall see whether they will then bend of themselves. And so the elders of the Jews sought out 12 of the most strong and able old men, and made them hold the standards, and they stood in that presence of the governor. And then Pilate said to the messenger, Take Jesus out, and by some means bring him in again. And Jesus and the messenger went out of the hall. And Pilate called the ensigns who before had borne the standards, and swore to them that if they had not borne the standards in that manner when Jesus before entered in, he would cut off their heads. Then the governor commanded Jesus to come in again. And the messenger did as he had done before, and very much entreated Jesus that he would go in upon his cloak, and walk upon it. And he did walk upon it, and went in. And when Jesus went in, the standards bowed themselves as before, and worshipped him. Chapter 2. Now when Pilate saw this, he was afraid, and was about to rise from his seat. But while he thought to rise, his own wife, who stood at a distance, sent to him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered much concerning him in a vision this night. That's from Matthew. When the Jews heard this, they said to Pilate, Did we not say unto thee, he is a conjurer? Behold, he hath caused thy wife to dream. Pilate then calling Jesus said, Thou hast heard what they testify against thee, and makest no answer? Jesus replied, If they had not a power of speaking, they could not have spoke. But because every one has the command of his own tongue, to speak both good and bad, let him look to it. But the elders of Jews answered and said to Jesus, What shall we look to? In the first place we know this concerning thee, that thou wast born through fornication. Secondly, that upon account of thy birth the infants were slain in Bethlehem. Thirdly, that thy father and mother Mary have fled into Egypt, because they could not trust their own people. Some of the Jews who stood by spake more favorably, We cannot say that he was born through fornication, but we know that his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, and so he was not born through fornication. And then said Pilate to the Jews who affirmed him to be born through fornication, This your account is not true, seeing there was a betrothment, and to testify, who are of your own nation. Annas and Caiaphas spake to Pilate, All this multitude of people is to be regarded, who cry out that he was born through fornication, and is a conjurer. But they who deny him to be born through fornication are his proselytes and disciples. Pilate answered Annas and Caiaphas, Who are the proselytes? And they answered, They are those who are the children of pagans, and are not become Jews, but followers of him. Then replied Eleazar, Asterius, and Antonius, and James, and Charis, and Samuel, Isaac, and Phinehas, Crispus, and Agrippa, Annas, and Judas, We are not proselytes, but children of Jews, and speak the truth, and were present when Mary was betrothed. Then Pilate, addressing himself to the 12 men who spake this, said to them, I conjure you by the life of Caesar, that ye faithfully declare whether he was born through fornication, and those things be true which ye have related. And they answered Pilate, We have a law whereby we are forbid to swear, it being a sin. Let them swear by the life of Caesar, that is not as we have said, and we will be contented to be put to death. Then said Annas and Caiaphas to Pilate, Those 12 men will not believe that we know him to be basely born, and to be a conjurer, although he pretends that he is the Son of God and a king, which we are so far from believing that we tremble to hear. They were sick with jealousy over him. Then Pilate commanded every one to go out, except the 12 men who said he was not born through fornication, and Jesus to withdraw to a distance, and said to them, Why have the Jews a mind to kill Jesus? And they answered him, They are angry because he was wrought cures on the Sabbath day. And Pilate said, Will they kill him for a good work? And they say unto him, Yes, sir. Chapter 3. Then Pilate, filled with anger, went out of the hall, and said to the Jews, I call the whole world to witness that I find no fault in that man. And the Jews replied to Pilate, If he had not been a wicked person, we had not brought him before thee. And Pilate said to them, Do ye take him and try him by your law? Then the Jews said, It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. And Pilate said to the Jews, The command, therefore, thou shalt not kill, belongs to you, but not to me. And he went again into the hall, and called Jesus by himself, and said to him, Art thou the King of the Jews? And Jesus answering said to Pilate, Dost thou speak this of thyself, or did the Jews tell it thee concerning me? Pilate answering said to Jesus, Am I a Jew? The whole nation and rulers of the Jews have delivered thee up to me. What hast thou done? And Jesus answering said, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight, and I should not have been delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from hence. Pilate said, Art thou a king then? And Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this end came I into the world, and for this purpose I came, that I should bear witness to the truth, and every one who is of the truth heareth my voice. Pilate saith to him, What is truth? And Jesus said, Truth is from heaven. Pilate said, Therefore truth is not on earth. And Jesus said to Pilate, Believe that truth is on earth among those who when they have the power of judgment are governed by truth, and form right judgment. Chapter 4. Then Pilate left Jesus in the hall, and went out unto the Jews, and said, I find not one fault in Jesus. And the Jews say unto him, But he said, I can destroy the temple of God, and in 3 days build it up again. And Pilate saith unto him, What sort of temple is that of which he speaketh? And the Jews say unto him, That which Solomon was 46 years in building. He said he would destroy, and in 3 days build up. And Pilate said to them again, I am innocent from the blood of that man. Do ye look to it? And the Jews say to him, His blood be upon us and our children. And then Pilate, calling together the elders and scribes, priests and Levites, saith to them privately, Do not act thus. I have found nothing in your charge against him, concerning his curing sick persons and breaking the Sabbath worthy of death. And the priests and Levites replied to Pilate, By the life of Caesar, if any one be a blasphemer, he is worthy of death. But this man hath blasphemed against the Lord. And then the governor again commanded the Jews to depart out of the hall, and calling Jesus said to him, What shall I do with thee? And Jesus answered him, Do according as it is written. And Pilate said to him, How is it written? Jesus saith to him, Moses and the prophets have prophesied concerning my suffering and resurrection. The Jews hearing this were provoked to anger, and said to Pilate, Why wilt thou any longer hear the blasphemy of that man? Pilate saith to them, If these words seem to you blasphemy, do ye take him, bring him to your court, and try him according to your law. The Jews replied to Pilate, Our law saith, he shall be obliged to receive 39 stripes. 39 stripes. But if after this manner he shall blaspheme against the Lord, he shall be stoned. Pilate saith unto them, If that speech of his was blasphemy, do ye try him according to your law. Then the Jews said to Pilate, Our law commands us not to put anyone to death. We desire that he may be crucified, because he deserves the death of the cross. And Pilate saith to them, It is not fit he should be crucified. Let him only be whipped and sent away. But when the governor looked upon the people that were present and the Jews, he saw many of the Jews in tears, and said to the chief priests of the Jews, All the people do not desire his death. And the elders of the Jews answered to Pilate, We and all the people came together for this very purpose, that he should die. And Pilate saith to them, Why should he die? And they said to Pilate, Because he declares himself to be the Son of God, and a king. Chapter 5. But Nicodemus, a certain Jew, stood before the governor, and said, I entreat thee, O righteous judge, that thou wouldst favor me with the liberty of speaking a few words. Pilate said to him, Speak on. Nicodemus said, I spake to the elders of the Jews, and the scribes, and the priests, and the Levites, and all the multitude of the Jews in their assembly. What is it ye would do with this man? He is a man who hath wrought many useful and glorious miracles, such as no man on earth ever wrought before, nor ever will work. Let him go, and let him do him no harm. If he cometh from God, his miracles, his miraculous cures will continue, but if from men, they will come to naught. Thus Moses, when he was sent by God into Egypt, wrought the miracles which God commanded him before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And though the magicians of that country, Jannes and Jambres, wrought their magic, the same miracles which Moses did, yet they could not work all which he did. All the miracles which the magicians wrought were not of God, as you know, O scribes and Pharisees, but they who wrought them perished, and all who believed them. And now let this man go, because the very miracles for which ye accuse him are from God, and he is not worthy of death. And the Jews then said to Nicodemus, Art thou become his disciple, and making speeches in his favor? And Nicodemus said to them, Is the governor become his disciple also, and does he make speeches for him? Did not Caesar place him in that high post? And when the Jews heard this, they trembled and gnashed their teeth at Nicodemus, and said to him, Mayest thou receive his doctrine for truth, and have thy lot with Christ? And Nicodemus replied, Amein, I will receive his doctrine, and have my lot with him, as ye have said. Then another certain Jew rose up, and desired leave of the governor to hear him a few words. And the governor said, Speak what thou hast a mind. And he said, I lay for 38 years by the sheep pool at Jerusalem, laboring under great infirmity, and waiting for a cure which should be wrought by the coming of an angel, who at a certain time troubled the water. And whosoever first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. And when Jesus saw me languishing there, he said to me, Wilt thou be made whole? And I answered, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. And he said, Rise, and take up thy bed, and walk. And I was immediately made whole, and took up my bed, and I walked. And then the Jews said to Pilate, Our Lord Governor, pray ask him what day it was on which he was cured of his infirmity. And the infirm person replied, It was on the Sabbath. The Jews said to Pilate, Did we not say that he wrought his cures on the Sabbath, and cast out devils by the prince of devils? Then another certain Jew came forth and said, I was blind, could hear sounds, but could not see anyone. And as Jesus was going along, I heard the multitude passing by, and I asked, What was that there? And they told me that Jesus was passing by. Then I cried out, saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And he stood still and commanded that I should be brought to him, and said to me, What wilt thou? And I said, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And he said to me, Receive thy sight. And presently I saw and followed him, rejoicing and giving thanks. Another Jew also came forth and said, I was a leper, and he cured me by his word only, saying, I will, be thou clean. And presently I was cleansed from my leprosy. And another Jew came forth and said, I was crooked, and he made me straight by his word. And a certain woman named Veronica said, I was afflicted with an issue of blood 12 years, and I touched the hem of his garments, and presently the issue of my blood stopped. And the Jews then said, We have a law that a woman shall not be allowed as an evidence. And after the other things, another Jew said, I saw Jesus inviting to a wedding with his disciples, and there was a want of wine in Cana of Galilee. And when the wine was all drank, he commanded the servants that they should fill 6 pots which were there with water. And they filled them up to the brim, and he blessed them, and turned the water into wine, and all the people drank, being surprised at this miracle. And another Jew stood forth and said, I saw Jesus teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum, and there was in the synagogue a certain man who had a devil, and he cried out, saying, Let me alone, what have ye to do with thee? Jesus of Nazareth, art thou come to destroy us? I know that thou art the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, unclean spirit, come out of that man. And presently he came out of him, and did not hurt at all him. And the following things were also said by a Pharisee. I saw that a great company came to Jesus from Galilee and Judea and the sea coast and many countries about Jordan. And many infirm persons came to him, and he healed them all. And I heard the unclean spirits crying out, saying, Thou art the Son of God. And Jesus strictly charged them that they should not make him known. And after this person, whose name was Centurio, said, I saw Jesus in Capernaum, and I entreated him, saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy. And Jesus said to me, I will come and cure him. But I said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldst be under my roof. Come under my roof, but only speak thy word, and my servant shall be healed. And Jesus said unto me, Go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so it be done unto thee. And my servant was healed from that same hour. So then a certain nobleman said, I had a son in Capernaum who lay at the point of death. And when I heard that Jesus was come into Galilee, I went and besought him that he would come down to my house and heal my son, for he was at the point of death. And he said to me, Go thy way, thy son liveth. And my son was cured from that hour. And besides these also many others of the Jews, both men and women, cried out and said, He is truly the Son of God, who cures all diseases only by his word, and to whom the devils are altogether subject. Some of them further said, This power can proceed from none but God. And Pilate said to the Jews, Why are not the devils subject to your doctors? And some of them said, The power of subjecting devils cannot proceed but from God. But others said to Pilate that he had raised Lazarus from the dead after he had been 4 days in his grave. And the governor, hearing this, trembling, said to the multitude of the Jews, What will it profit you to shed innocent blood? Chapter 6. Then Pilate, having called together Nicodemus and the 15 men who said that Jesus was not born through fornication, and to them, What shall I do, seeing that there is like to be a tumult among the people? And they said unto him, We know not. Let them look to it who raised the tumult. Pilate then called the multitude again, and said to them, Ye know that ye have a custom, that I should release you to one prisoner at the feast of the Passover. I have a noted prisoner, a murderer who is called Barabbas, and Jesus who is called Christ, in whom I find nothing that deserves death. Which of them, therefore, have you a mind that I should release to you? And they all cry out and say, Release to us Barabbas. And Pilate saith to them, What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? And they all answer, Let him be crucified. Again they cry out and say to Pilate, You are not the friend of Caesar, if you release this man. For he hath declared that he is the Son of God and a king. But you are inclined that he should be king and not Caesar. Then Pilate, filled with anger, said to them, Your nation hath always been seditious, and you are always against those who have been serviceable to you. And the Jews replied, Who are those who have been serviceable to us? And Pilate answered them, Your God, who delivered you from the hard bondage of the Egyptians, and brought you over the Red Sea, as though it had been dry land, and fed you in the wilderness with manna and the flesh of quails, and brought water out of the rock, and gave you a law from heaven. Ye provoked him in all ways, and desired for him yourselves a molten calf, and worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and said, These are thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, on account of which your God was inclined to destroy you. But Moses interceded for you, and your God heard him, and forgave your iniquity. And afterwards you were enraged against, and would have killed your prophets, Moses and Aaron, if they had when they had fled to the tabernacle. And you were always murmuring against God and his prophets, and rising from his judgment seat, he would have gone out. But the Jews all cried out, We acknowledge Caesar to be king, not Jesus. And whereas this person, as soon as he was born, the wise men came and offered gifts unto him, which when Herod heard, he was exceedingly troubled, and would have killed him. When his father knew this, he fled with him and his mother Mary into Egypt. Herod, when he had heard he was born, would have slain him, and accordingly sent and slew all the children which were in Bethlehem, and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under. And when Pilate heard this account, he was afraid, and commanding silence among the people who made a noise, he said to Jesus, Art thou therefore a king? All the Jews replied to Pilate, He is the very person whom Herod sought to have slain. Then Pilate, taking water, washed his hands before the people, and said, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. Look ye to it. And the Jews answered and said, His blood be upon us and our children. Then Pilate commanded Jesus to be brought before him, and spake to him in the following words, Thy own nation hath charged thee as making thyself a king. Wherefore I, Pilate, sentence thee to be whipped according to the laws of former governors, and that thou be first bound and then hanged upon a cross in that place where thou art now a prisoner, and also 2 criminals with thee, whose names are Demas and Gestas. Chapter 7. Then Jesus went out of the hall, and the 2 thieves with him. And when they came to the place which is called Golgotha, they stripped him of his raiment, and girt him about with their linen cloth, and put a crown of thorns upon his head, and put a reed in his hand. And in like manner did they to the 2 thieves who were crucified with him, Demas on his right hand, and Gestas on his left. But Jesus said, My Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they divided his garments, and said, and upon his vesture they cast lots. And the people in the meantime stood by. And the chief priests and elders of the Jews mocked him, saying, He saved others, but now himself cannot save. If he be the Son of God, let him now come down from the cross. And the soldiers also mocked him, and taking vinegar and gall, offered it to him to drink, and said to him, If thou art king of the Jews, deliver thyself. Then Longinus, a certain soldier, taking a spear, pierced his side, and presently there came forth blood and water. And Pilate wrote the title upon the cross in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek letters, This is the King of the Jews. But one of the 2 thieves who were crucified with Jesus was named Gestas, and said to Jesus, If thou art the Christ, deliver thyself and us. But the thief who was crucified on his right hand, whose name was Demas, answering rebuked him, and said, Dost not thou fear God, who art condemned to this punishment? We indeed receive rightly and justly the demerit of our actions, but this Jesus, what evil hath he done? And after this groaning he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus answering said to him, Verily I say unto thee, that thou this day thou shalt be with me in paradise. Chapter 8. And it was about the 6th hour, and darkness was upon the face of the whole earth until the 9th hour. And while the sun was eclipsed, behold, the veil of the temple was rent from the top to the bottom, and the rocks also were rent, and the graves opened, and many bodies of saints which slept arose. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Heli, Heli, lama sabachthani, which being interpreted is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And after these things Jesus said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said this, he gave up his ghost. But when the centurion saw that Jesus thus crying gave up the ghost, he glorified God, and said, Oh, of a truth this was a just man. And all the people who stood by were exceedingly troubled at the sight, and reflecting upon what had passed, smote upon their breasts, and then returned to the city of Jerusalem. And the centurion went to the governor, and related to him all that had passed. And when he had heard these things, he was exceedingly sorrowful. And calling the Jews together, said to them, Have ye seen the miracles of the sun's eclipse, and the other things which came to pass while Jesus was dying, the earthquake, and the veil ripping in two, and the dead people walking around? For Christ's sake. Which when the Jews heard, they answered to the governor, The eclipse of the sun happened according to its usual custom. But all those who were in the acquaintance of Christ stood at a distance, as did the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee, observing all these things, knew that it was not the time for an eclipse. And behold, a certain man of Arimathea, named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus, but not openly so for fear of the Jews, came to the governor, and entreated the governor that he would give him leave to take away the body of Jesus from the cross. And the governor gave him leave. And Nicodemus came, bringing with him a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight. And they took down Jesus from the cross with tears, and bound him with linen cloths and spices, according to the custom of burying among the Jews, and placed him in a new tomb which Joseph had built and caused to be cut out of a rock, in which never any man had been put. And they rolled a great stone to the door.